Hello, this is Billy Fletcher here with from Alliance Champions Training Center. To continue our discussion, we talked last time about our functional fitness training system, our physical training, and we break that down into three components: movement, strength, and conditioning. Last time we talked about how movement was our number one priority. We also mentioned how that was not always the case. That strength, for many years, I would have said that was our number one priority. So even though movement now becomes our number one focus, strength is still very, very important. I like to quote Mark Rippetoe, a famous strength conditioning coach. Has a lot of great quotes. One of his quotes is, stronger people are harder to kill and in general more useful. Okay, it's kind of a funny quote, but it really makes a lot of sense. When we look at strength, we look at it from a couple different perspectives, but one perspective is from a functional standpoint. When I was coming up, not every sport, for instance, thought strength training was important. If you played football, it was important. Maybe track, it was important. I remember our basketball coach really didn't want our basketball players lifting weights unless they played football. Certainly baseball and golf didn't want their athletes lifting weights. It was really mainly for football, like I said, in some track athletes. Of course, that's really changed over the last, now I guess that's 30 years or so. Really every sport you look at has some type of strength program as a part of it. And the reason is that, from a strength standpoint, if you become a stronger athlete, you can become a better athlete. Now, strength doesn't take the place of technical skill. You still need that, but strength from a functional standpoint is going to make you better no matter what you do, and that also carries over into just general life. If you're, any movement you're doing, if it's just yard work, even if you're an endurance athlete, being stronger is going to help you with that. Okay. The other side of it is just from a health and longevity standpoint. Once you reach about age 25, your metabolism tends to slow down about 2 to 4% per decade. Okay, you also lose about 5 pounds of muscle per decade. Okay, or 5 pounds of lean body mass. Okay, fortunately, you can offset that through high intensity strength training. Okay, not necessarily low intensity. So low intensity does very little to maintain or build muscle, but high intensity training can help you actually increase your muscle even as you get older. So from a health longevity standpoint, it's very, very important. Even the old grip test, it's been used for years. Some people look at that still as a better indicator of overall general health than even cardiovascular conditioning. So strength can play a very important role as we get older, helping us continue to be able to move and do things well as we age. Okay, so really that's two kind of sides of it: the functional standpoint of whether I'm playing a sport or just want to get around better, and from a health and longevity standpoint. But how do we train? Okay, so kind of going back on that, for many years I really focused on conventional strength training, which is very, very effective. So let's take from our talk last time, basic movements: push and pull for your upper body, squat, hinge for your lower body. So how does that break down into movement? Well, let's take start with the lower body, the squat and the hinge. Squat obviously will be any type of squat you might do, or even a lunge type pattern. Hinge would be things like a deadlift, a kettlebell swing, a clean, for instance. All those would be fit into those categories. Even running would be a hinge type pattern. And then upper body, we mentioned last time, would be, it could be a press, like an overhead press or a bench press, push-ups, handstand push-ups. All those would be push movements. Pulling would be like any type of row or a pull-up or pull-down exercise. So those are very basic exercises that can be very, very effective for building strength if done in a high-intensity fashion. Okay. What's really changed for us over the last couple of years is I've begun looking at that a little bit differently. So those are very effective means, but what I've really fallen in love with over the last, especially the last year, is really using also other methods, such as we call them strongman type lifts. Now, doesn't mean you have to go and compete in the world's strongest man, but using things like sandbags, farmer's walks, sled pushes, sled pulls, things of that nature. We have found really, honestly, some surprising gains in both lean body mass and strength using those movements. And what I love about those movements is that For the most part, there's less load on your spine. There's very little eccentric movement with most of those exercises, and it's very low skill. So what does that mean? That means that we can do those exercises with a higher level of intensity and remain safe at the same time. So that's what I really love about it. And we've seen a tremendous improvement across a very broad range of athletes that we work with. From our young Parisi athletes, we had some kids this past summer put on about 15 pounds of muscle, get a lot stronger in just a few months, and that was the predominant thing that we used for getting them stronger. And then we have on the other side of it, I call it my OG class. That class, we probably average age might be 65. Okay, and we range, for most people in that class, probably from about 60 up to 80. I think 82 is our oldest athlete. And so I call them athletes because they are, they're moving well, they're pushing the sled, they're pulling the sled, they're carrying sandbags. So it's really been encouraging to see how they've really responded. So everybody kind of in between, from your best athletes to people who maybe not have as much mobility, have benefited from these movements. So we kind of take different approaches. Also, from looking at from the standpoint of measuring strength. The conventional lift's a little bit easier to measure, but also I think sometimes people fall into the trap when they're looking at strength, trying to compare themselves to someone else. I encourage people to think about comparing themselves to themselves. So, and it doesn't, I use an example of, the sport which I love and compete in, jiu-jitsu. You can feel someone if they're strong or not on the mat when you tie it with them, okay? But that's not necessarily going to correlate to what they're lifting in the gym. You might be able to lift more than them in the gym, and you get on the mat like, oh my gosh, this guy's really, really strong. So it doesn't always necessarily correlate, but as that individual gets stronger, it's going to help him, again, in whatever sport or whatever activity he wants to he or she wants to participate in. So we'll try to get people to, yes, and try to improve, but don't worry about what someone else is doing. Try to focus on your individual improvement, and then try to find movements that resonate with you. So I'll use the squat as an example. If we have someone that can squat very well, pain-free with a sandbag, I'm going to have them focus on that. If they do well with a barbell squat, we may focus on that. It doesn't really matter. We're still doing the same movement pattern. We're just finding the right tool for that individual. So kind of to summarize the strength training again, the benefits are from a functional standpoint. No matter what you're trying to do, which is daily life or you're participating in a sport, it's going to help you. From a health and longevity standpoint, it's going to help you there as well. So those are really the two main focal points that we try to emphasize in our training program, and we have a multitude of different ways to go about, working with that and improving your strength.